Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, How the Use of Varied Content Types Drives Impact in Research, Teaching, and Learning, which is sponsored by ProQuest. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you should be able to see the presentation materials. And I apologize if this is a little outdated now since WebEx has updated the software, but you should be able to, along the right-hand side, see a chat and a Q&A panel. If you don't see them, you may see some buttons along the bottom of your screen that will give you access to the chat and the Q&A. The chat panel is the one that looks like a little dialog box. Please use the chat panel to let me know of any technical difficulties you may be experiencing, and I will troubleshoot those with you one-on-one. Please use the Q&A panel to submit questions to our panelists. Please feel free to submit them throughout, and we'll hold those until the end when we'll have a dedicated Q&A session. In addition, we are using the hashtag ACRLChoiceWebinars during the event, so if you have another screen handy, shout out to us. We're at choice_reviews on Twitter. Also note that we are recording today's program and that everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archived version. All right, and our speakers today are Barbara Olson and Mark Ayling. Mark Ayling is the Senior Product Marketing Manager at ProQuest, where he is responsible for ProQuest subscription databases, including ABI Inform and ProQuest Central. He has over 15 years of experience in academic publishing and is based in Cambridge in the UK. And Barbara Olson is the Product Marketing Manager Lead at ProQuest, where she is responsible for marketing ProQuest's primary source collections. Barb has over 30 years of marketing experience in product, database, and direct marketing, and is based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And with that, I do believe we are ready to get started, so I will turn it over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So as Mark said, today Barb and I are going to be talking about how the use of varied content types drives impact in research, teaching, and learning. So not only can researchers at all levels access more information than ever before, but they can also access and use more different types of information. So as well as the more traditionally accessible academic content types such as books and journals, it's now even easier to access and use things like conference papers, dissertations, and videos, for example. So as information providers at ProQuest, we need to understand changes like this to ensure that we're providing the right information to researchers. And to do this, we need to be able to answer these sorts of questions. So what types of information are researchers using? Do different researchers use different types of information? How important is it to lecturers that their students use different types of information? And importantly, what does this mean for us as information providers at ProQuest, and also for you as librarians? So to answer these questions, we need to understand researchers. And by researcher, I mean anyone that carries out research, whether it's an undergraduate or a professor. They all need access to the right information to help them to reach their goals. And to help them to understand these goals, we talk to researchers in a number of ways. So at conferences, we run focus groups and user groups. We go to libraries and talk to students and researchers there. We conduct interviews, and we run surveys, for example. So often these different researchers, despite being different levels and studying different areas, share common goals and common challenges. And we hear a wide variety of these, but some are more common than others. So here are a few examples of some of the challenges we hear again and again. So the first one there, I'm anxious that I'm going to miss something in my literature review. We hear this a lot from, especially from researchers sending papers to journals. Also, we hear it's hard to find the latest research in my field. The peer review process can take 2 or 3 years. So if you're a researcher in a really cutting-edge field where things are moving really quickly. Maybe 2 or 3 years is too long to wait to find out the latest research. Also, we hear things about demonstrating the wider impact of their work, and also the challenges of knowing where to start when having to research outside the normal field and outside of their comfort zone. So librarians are also acknowledging that they may need to think differently to help researchers overcome challenges like these. The data on this slide is taken from the most recent Ithaca US Library Survey report from March last year. This question was answered by over 700 deans and directors. As part of the survey, they were asked to say how strongly they agreed with the following statement. As scholarship moves steadily away from its exclusive dependence on text, libraries must shift their own collecting to include new material types. So you can see on those results that well over 2/3 of respondents strongly agreed with that statement, and only the little grey part at the end represents the tiny minority that disagreed. This really aligns with what we hear from researchers at all levels, and also see on our own usage data at ProQuest. Researchers are using lots of different types of information, but we're always looking to understand this better, and we've been running a survey to try to do this. So we've run previous surveys looking into similar things in 2014 and last year. This gave us some really useful data into what types of information researchers are using. But we wanted to take this on to the next level and try and better understand the value of using different types of data. And that was the main reason for running the survey that we ran in March and April this year. So a quick word on how we ran the survey. We distributed via email and social. We got over 1,300 responses from all over the world, including 350 from North America, 174 from continental Europe. There's broad coverage in terms of researcher level too. So we got around 650 tenured faculty, but crucially, almost 200 students. And it was really important that we got student responses in this survey, as become apparent later on. We also had responses from a wide variety of subject areas. So over half were from social science, but also 569 from humanities, and over 200 from the STEM subjects too. So this survey led to some really interesting results, and while we analysed the data, 4 key findings emerged, and we're going to talk in detail about those now. The first was around lecturers and students, and what we found was that faculty really want students to use a wide mix of content types. So we wanted to understand how important lecturers think it is for students to use lots of different types of information. Do they see the value in their students using lots of types in their research? And if so, what does this actually help with? What does it help them to achieve? So we asked the following questions just to respondents who also taught. Please indicate whether you agree or disagree with the following. Using a wide variety of different types of information allows students to do the following. Now, we thought this would be a good point in the presentation to ask the audience. So you should see a polling question on your screen now. I'm going to come back to this shortly. But this really focuses on that third area there. So how many of the respondents either agreed or strongly disagreed with the following statement? Using a wide variety of different types of information allows students to produce better quality assignments. So if you could take a moment now to answer the letters A to J, representing different percentages on the scale. So we're going to come back to that one in a minute. I'm going to share some of the other results with you first. So the first one we asked was, how does this impact students' understanding of concepts and ideas? And it was pretty clear here, as far as lecturers are concerned, almost all agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that it allows students to understand concepts and ideas more fully. So they're really showing that they see the value in this to help students just learn. So the next one we asked was around conducting a more thorough literature review. So this goes back to one of those common challenges that we talked about earlier on, about really the fear of missing something that they really should be mentioning in their literature review. They want to be confident that they're including all the relevant information as well as taking into account all the relevant viewpoints. And again, really strong percentage agreed or strongly disagreed, agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. Now, we move on to the moment of truth. How many, what percentage of respondents agreed that it helped to produce better quality assignments? So if we can have a look through the polling answers here. Looks like there's a big, quite a nice curve there. I'd say that on average, 71 to 80% looks like the room feels there. So it's actually a little higher, 91%. So again, it's showing that these impacts on learning are really coming through in the quality of the assignments as well, 91% agreeing that it has an impact there. And again, on the final one, we asked whether this had an impact on achieving a better grade. So 72% was the lowest response, but still, there's almost 3/4 of respondents thinking this actually has an impact on the grade of the course at the end. So it's quite a still really high number. So we also put a comment box for this question for respondents to add any other areas they thought were important. There were some really interesting responses here, and here's a few quite representative responses. So the first one here, allow students to be more critical of secondary sources, and then on a similar line here, become better citizens. In this era where fake news spreads, and on old and new media alike, this skill is vital to our democracy. There really is something about getting different viewpoints, becoming critical, having a more rigorous approach. Also, there's a nice one here about following their curiosity and enjoying themselves. So having access to many different types of information gives you those different viewpoints, allowing students to really immerse themselves in the question or the subject. On a really practical level, something about information literacy and becoming prepared for the workplace as well. So in summary, we found that faculty want students to use a wide mix of content types, and it helps them in a number of ways. Fundamentally helps them to learn, leads them to be more critical and rigorous in their approach to information, helps them to enjoy their area of study, and ultimately it can lead to better quality work and higher grades. So key finding 2, we found that all users work with a variety of content types in teaching, research and learning. So we asked 2 questions to better understand what types of content researchers are using and lecturers are recommending. We're going to focus on the question to all researchers first, that first question there, which is, which of the following types of information do you use in your research? So we gave respondents a list of 30 of the most commonly used information types, and we asked this question to all respondents, which was over 1,300. And these are the top 10 most used content types from all respondents in the survey. So maybe a few surprises, maybe a few that you would expect to see. The top 4 there, scholarly journals, print books, dissertations and theses, and ebooks. We'd probably, a lot of us would guess that that would be the top 4. But really, the key thing we thought from this is that different types of information have their own unique value depending on the different stage of the research or what question they're trying to ask. So, as I mentioned before, scholarly journals can take 1, 2, 3 years from submission to publication. So conference papers, working papers and dissertations, for example, don't go through that peer review process, although there is still a kind of academic review of that content. But that gives researchers access to this kind of information far earlier. Also, different content types can give a different perspective. For example, researching a topic using statistics, number 7 on the list, government documents, number 6, or working papers at number 9, might give really different perspectives. So we also wanted to look at differences between different groups. I mentioned we got lots of responses from students earlier on, and that was really important. So here's the most commonly used content types by students, with the differences kind of marked out there. So ebooks were the most common. There's also a couple of content types there that were much higher for students than the group as a whole. Case studies, unsurprisingly, also newspapers in the top 10. Higher level content, sort of higher level academically, was lower down the list. So scholarly journals, dissertations, and conference papers were lower down for students. So in summary, although there may be some differences in the most used content types for the different groups, we found that users are working with a variety of content, whether they be teaching, researching, or learning. So we also wanted to look into how much lecturers can influence student decisions on what type of content to use. We found, broadly speaking, that students are influenced by their lecturers. So the question we asked, it was similar to the previous question, but it was only to lecturers. We asked them which of the following types of information they direct their students to in their teaching. And they had the same list of content types. So by and large, very close alignment. So what lecturers recommend is in the green table on the left, and what students use is on the grey table on the right. Top 4 very similar across both groups. The value of case studies, unsurprisingly, is much higher here. Lecturers are recommending it, students are using it. This often comes through in conversations with lecturers and students, so it's no surprise to see it so high on the list. Also, things like government documents and conference proceedings are also both often recommended by lecturers and well used by students. Videos are also well recommended by lecturers, but according to our data, they were less well used by students. So we know that video use is becoming ubiquitous, content now routinely viewed on phones and tablets. So this was quite a surprising data point. So we thought this might be another good point to get some feedback from you on video specifically. So you should see another polling question popping up on your screen now. So the question here is, how has the use of video for research, learning, and/or teaching at your institution changed over the last 3 years? So has it stayed about the same? Has it increased? Or has it decreased? I'll just give you a moment to click on that. Okay, should we take a look at the results? Can't see the results right now, so maybe we'll come back to that. I'll move on while those results are coming in. So obviously this is kind of important to us. It was a little bit of a surprise to see that down there. Oh, the polling results have come in now. So around the biggest chunk here is definitely around increase. So we've got 90 or so say it's increased. Very few say it's decreased. Reasonably small amount have said it stayed the same. So this really fits in with everything else that we hear. So we did a bit of digging into this data point a little more, and there's a lot of evidence pointing to an increasing importance of video as a content type. So I quoted a couple of examples here. So this is an article by Jennifer Dixon published in Library Journal, September last year. 95% of North American libraries offer some sort of video streaming content. Also, a really interesting point here, 1/3 of schools reported that their 2016-2017 streaming video budget increased over the previous year. So in these days of tightening budgets, it looks like video may be an area where budgets are actually increasing. Also, an overwhelming majority of UK and North American institutions use video for teaching, 98% in the UK and 89% in North America. So with such a correlation between what lecturers are recommending and what students are using, it seems like a safe assumption to say that video usage will increase among students. And I'd expect if we run this survey or a similar survey in a year or 2 years, I'd fully expect to see that that usage number for videos increase among students. So in summary, although there might be a few outliers and possibly some indications of future trends, on the whole, lecturer recommendations have a big influence on the type of content used by their students. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Barb.
Okay, thanks, Mark. We'll just wait for the, yeah, there we go, great, thank you. So I'm going to spend the rest of the time we have today talking about our final key finding from the research, which was that faculty see the value in primary sources and encourage students to use them. So we asked the outcome question on this side at saying, you assign primary sources to your students, please indicate the importance of each reason, and we gave them an answer list. But how I ended up picking off these people to get this question was that they indicated on their answer list previously in the study if they used any one of these, what we consider to be primary sources on the answer list. So that's how we got that. And what I'm going to do now is actually, let's look at every response by the answer choice and give a little background for each. So overwhelmingly, and probably not surprisingly, the most important reason for using primary sources in teaching was to help students develop critical thinking skills. In fact, over 80% of respondents indicated it was extremely important. So an essential part of the research process is to help students identify questions, think for themselves, and draw their own conclusions. In a study that was conducted by JISC, which is the large academic consortia in the UK, faculty in that survey indicated that primary sources actually help inspire new thinking. It improves the result or outcome of the research. It also helps a student either narrow in or broaden their perspective on a topic, or it actually could even change the focus of the research altogether. But there are implications of this beyond the classroom. In a 2013 survey of employers, 93% of employers say critical thinking, clear communication, and the ability to solve complex problems is actually more important than a student's undergraduate major. So the next highest answer response was provide greater understanding of the topic being studied. So many times, undergraduate history majors, as you probably well know, are required to conduct original research using primary sources, and then they write a major senior essay. Part of this process, students will need to use a variety of resources during this typically semester-long project, many of which will be primary sources. So in my research for this and reading many accounts of this process for these students, when we actually talked to students about the process, they agree that primary sources gave them a deeper understanding of their topic, and they actually felt like they were taking ownership of their education. As they explore these resources and get engaged with their topic, they try to understand what it felt like during that time period or event, the research process actually becomes transformational and inspiring for them. So 70% of the faculty felt that this particular thing, providing greater understanding of the topic being studied, was extremely important. Oops, went too fast there. So the next highest response is allowing students to work with original sources. So 63% of the faculty felt this was of extreme importance. So the 93% is showing both the sum of extremely and very important. So as we've talked about, you know, students have to do these large research projects. They want, faculty want students to actually be using original resources. So they felt that this was of a particular importance. The next highest on the list, the answer response, was to allow students to come to their own conclusions. So as part of the research process and in the development of these critical thinking skills, students will use primary sources to challenge their assumptions, broaden their perspectives, and come to their own conclusions about an event, a person, or an issue being studied. Of the 87% importance here, 50% of the faculty felt like this was of extreme importance. The next answer response was to develop a grounding in history to better understand, to better question interpretations made in secondary sources. So as the research process happens, students are beginning to question resources, secondary resources that previously they may have never had. They would have taken them at face value, not questioned them, and now in this research process, they're beginning to question those. So as students find sources on their own, they may challenge what they're learning and have debates and actually discuss what really happened in history. They develop their own viewpoints. They write their papers on that viewpoint. This whole thing, as you can see, is all very tightly tied to this development of the critical thinking skills. So the last answer response was to drive impact and outcomes in the classroom. So what we've seen, and you may have witnessed yourself in your daily work with students and faculty, as critical thinking skills are being developed by these students and they're engaging in their education, certainly they're going to yield better outcomes in the classroom in terms of quality of the work, the grade, their engagement. You know, all of those things are really great, but less important to the teaching process, and they felt like the research process actually was much more important. So driving outcomes is great, but the research process was really of most importance, and only 36% of the 72% felt this was of extreme importance. Okay, so, you know, we gave an answer list to this particular question, but we also allowed our respondents to give us some of their own thoughts on why they may be assigning primary sources in their teaching. And there were some really great, interesting results there, as you might imagine, as there are in open-ended research questions. So I wanted to share a few of them with you and put them up on the screen. I won't read them word for word, but I thought there were a couple of really good, interesting ones here. One is archival materials require students to actually spend time in the library and the archives. Primary sources help students understand history as a product of raw materials. And it also actually, as we all well know, and we probably say often, connecting primary sources help connect the past to the present. So let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about the importance of the role of the library. So Ithaca does an S&R faculty survey, as you probably well know, every 3 years. They've been doing it since the year 2000. And we're showing some results here from the 2015 survey, which are relevant to what we're talking about today, which is the way faculty are thinking about teaching and learning. So one of the important key findings in that 2015 survey was interest in supporting students and their competencies and learning outcomes shows a sign of surging. So in previous cycles of the survey, so in 2012 specifically, there has been an increase in the share of faculty members who believe that their undergraduate students have poor research skills. Not a good thing, but a good thing is there's a substantial increase in the perceived importance of the role of the library in helping students develop research, critical analysis, and information skills. So in a similar study that Ithaca does for libraries, to librarians, results from 2016 show that libraries see developing research and critical thinking skills as an important part of their role. So both faculty and librarians are agreeing that this is important and both agreeing that the library has a very important role in helping to develop these skills. But what I wanted to call out on this particular slide is in looking at 2010, 13, and 16, certainly in 2010 there was pretty much a tie between the top two things that librarians thought was important in terms of their role, which was to develop these critical thinking skills, but also to engage with faculty in terms of their teaching activities. And then that sort of flipped a little bit in 2013, and we saw that trend continue in 2016. But one of the things that we're seeing on the publisher or vendor side of things when we're talking to librarians, those that actually do engage with faculty to embed content right into the classroom, into the course curriculum. On the library side of things, you will see, you know, that manifests itself in high usage of that particular database, which is great. But what we also found in another survey that was done by the University of Denver, when they actually polled their students after this particular experiment, they found that students were more engaged in the class. They valued the experience of using primary sources, being able to discern between how to use a primary source and a secondary source, but also gave them a deep understanding of their topic. So naturally, it's all of those things that we were talking about in our original question as to why faculty are assigning them. So it all is a very tightly woven story about the importance of primary sources. So bottom line, faculty's confidence in the library role is on the increase, which is great. In 2012, about 58% of faculty felt the library role was important in terms of developing new skills for students. 3 years later, that percentage is almost 20% higher, so it's a good thing. So in 2018, maybe we'll see that even go higher. So I want to shift gears a little bit again and talk about some research that ProQuest has been doing on the scholarly impact of newspapers. So we embarked on this research to better understand the importance of newspapers in scholarly articles and to identify trends across specific newspaper titles and by subject. So the scope of the research was to evaluate and analyze citations of 4 key newspaper titles from the years 2000 to 2017, those titles being the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the Guardian. And all of the data collection and analysis and report was written by Dr. Eric Meyer, who has just taken a new role as the Dean of School of Information at UT Austin. Previously was the Director of Graduate Studies at the University of Oxford. And so he has written a paper about it. Maybe some of you saw it in SSRN, and we are writing a white paper on it as well. So what we ended up finding, our key findings in this research, were that the use of newspapers, newspaper sources in research is growing. We also found that typically you would think newspapers would be used in social sciences and arts and humanities research, but we were actually finding it well beyond that in business, economics, finance, psychology, and even in some health sciences. And we also found some very distinctive patterns by newspaper title, by subject, but we also found them geographically. So what I mean by that is, for instance, if we think about the New York Times for a moment, we didn't see any one particular discipline really emerging out of the New York Times. We saw it across the board. So in politics, in security, in media, management, history, area studies, just across the board. But geographically, what we found and what we expected to find in each one of these titles was that faculty and institutions, say in the New York or East Coast area, we expected them to have high usage of the New York Times, which we found at Columbia, New York University, Penn, Harvard. But then after the top 5, it just geographically dispersed across the United States, but also around the globe. So we found usage in the UK and Australia and Asia. So lots of interesting patterns. And by title, of course, it changed by title. So you would think Washington Post certainly is going to be about politics and policy, which it was, generally used by institutions in the DC area. But then we saw it could expand way beyond its typical. So really interesting and fun results that we found in this research, which inspired us to start looking at some of our other content types. So we're looking at our historical periodicals collections, and we're looking at our dissertations and thesis database, as well as our scholarly journals on our platform to see if we're starting to see these same trends emerge. So we're looking across subjects and topics of research, we're looking at geographic dispersion, and we're looking at trends over time. So we're starting to see some of the same sort of patterns we saw with news, which then again further inspired us to start looking at things like government documents and archival sources, which are a little bit harder to attribute to a particular product, which isn't really what our goal is. We were just more looking for the different content types. So what this was telling us is what we wanted to really tell you and share with you all today was that varied content types are certainly in demand by faculty, by students and researchers. They're using different content types in research, teaching, learning, completing assignments. As Mark mentioned, we had a list of 30 different content types. We saw a top 10, we saw a bottom 10, we saw different kinds of faculty using different kinds of content types, more often or less often, depending on what they're doing. So we're also seeing different content types start to emerge. So right now we see video typically used as a teaching tool, but based on the investment we're seeing in some of our customers with video into their collections, we expect to start to see video showing up as a researcher tool as well. And, you know, for the past 10 years or so, data has emerged, conference and working papers have emerged. We expect social media to emerge, and who knows what will be in our next survey. I mean, virtual reality might be on the answer list this time, who knows. So definitely the idea is that the content types are definitely continuing to expand, and they need to be in the library for your researchers. But certainly having different content types has very positive impacts, not only in the research and the outcome itself, but on the research process. So again, just to reiterate what our key findings have been, and what we started out with were faculty want students to use a wide mix of content. All users work with a variety of content in their teaching, research, and learning, and students are certainly influenced by what their lecturer recommends to them to use. And faculty see value in primary sources and encourage their students to use them for a variety of reasons, but most overwhelmingly for that important critical thinking skill development, which serves them, as we saw, well beyond the classroom and into their future life. So I've seen a couple of questions in the chat or in the Q&A about the white paper. So we have promised to you that we will give you the white paper, which we will do in a follow-up email to those that attended today, and actually those who didn't as well. But also what we've done is taken it a step further, and we've tried to put into practice what we've talked to you about today, which was to come up with a real-life research example and how someone would go about using different content types in order to do research, complete an assignment, whatever the research task is, and we recorded it. And we're going to give you a link to that recording, and you're welcome to put it on your LibGuide, give it to your instructional librarians when you're talking to students about how to use library resources, you know, all those kinds of things. You're welcome to use that however you like. So we're excited to make that available to you, and would love to hear your feedback on how useful you thought it was. But that really concludes what we wanted to share with you today. And so I am going to look at the Q&A and see if I see any specific questions in there that I can share with the group. Let me just get 1 second. Not able to scroll that. Not seeing any questions in Q&A. If any of you have any questions, you are welcome to add one in, or if you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to ask the question directly to either Mark or myself.
So Barb, it's Mark here.
Yeah.
I've seen a couple of questions coming in around video.
Okay, go ahead.
So yeah, there's a couple of questions around video. Whether when we asked respondents whether they used video, whether we included things like YouTube, whether we asked lecturers if they were recommending third-party videos or the videos created by the lecturer themselves. This is a really interesting area, I think. We didn't specify, we just said video. So we thought about how we were going to ask it. We had a long list of content types. We didn't want it to get too long, so we just put video. But you could almost run another survey just looking into video, I think, because it would be so interesting. We could have quite a few theories on how people use video or how they almost perceive they use video. We were wondering whether students who are so used to using video, they might use video really early stage research to just kind of understand a concept that they're unfamiliar with really broadly, but they don't even think of it as being part of their research process because it's so broad and so early in their research perhaps. So I think this is going to be an area that we are going to dig into a bit more, but in answer to the initial question, we didn't specify, we just asked video and just said video.
Yeah, I can see the questions now too. I see one about the discipline breakdown as well, and I will say that we didn't survey every discipline across the board in this particular survey. However, when I was looking at the primary sources results, I actually did look at humanities faculty versus all other faculty to see if they were using a different set of content types, which they were. So primary or humanities faculty used more primary sources than faculty in general, although faculty were using primary sources too. I saw a heavier use of them and more in different kinds of primary sources among humanities faculty than I did at faculty in general. And then I also see a question here about did we only talk to universities, and yeah, we did really focus on the academic market. We didn't look at public libraries or national libraries. We were really focused on academic institutions. And let's see, what is the uptick of distance learning affecting these trends? We didn't really focus on distance learning as a primary distinction in our results. Did you look at encyclopedias or digital reference projects as a content type? That's a good question. I don't believe encyclopedias is on the list. Was it, Mark? Do you remember?
I think it may have been. I'm going to have a quick look.
These are all good questions and gives us some good ideas for when we've done this. We've done this survey many times at ProQuest, and these are good suggestions for us to continue to improve the survey.
No, you were correct. Encyclopedias weren't on that initial list.
Yeah, and we did have an answer list of ebooks versus print books. So, I mean, we just saw them as being different. We didn't want to group them together as just books because I think they are probably used differently. So that's why we separated it, really, just because we see them as a different content type. How did we decide on the top 30? And we didn't decide it was a top 30. It was just a list that we came up with from our own research that we did on different content types. But like I said, if you have suggestions on other formats we should be including, we'd love to get your input from that as we improve and consider a survey for 2019.
But just on that question, so we'd run similar surveys last year and the year before with lots of lists of content types. So we used that to kind of influence our decisions. So any ones that we had before that were really low, we didn't include them. And also from things like usage data and other information that we had. So we didn't want the list to be so overwhelming that people wouldn't fill it in, but we wanted to include a kind of rough idea of what we thought would be the most common based on those previous surveys, really.
Yeah. Do you see that question there, Mark, about open lab notebooks, that sort of thing? I think those are good potential content types to add as they're growing in importance and prevalence, really.
Yeah, I think that yeah, that's all really good points. So we didn't separate out open access journals from journals, but this is definitely obviously looking into things like open source content and publicly available content is something that we do in other areas, but yeah, it may be something that we look into in this particular survey next time for sure.
Yeah. Agreed.
Oh, and the open science movement as well. Yeah, that's a really interesting point too.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, these are all good ideas. So thank you for everyone who's responding here. Yeah, I think that's also a good point someone mentions about including distance and online learners, which is a growing, I mean, it's amazing to me when I hear some of the enrollment numbers, so absolutely correct, but it's definitely growing and would be interesting to be able to, because we can separate our faculty into different disciplines, maybe separate our students too, instead of just putting students into a bucket, kind of separating them out as distance and online learners versus in-person learners. So that's a good point as well.
It'd be really interesting to see the difference between international students as well.
Yeah, agreed. Mm-hmm. Okay, so thank you very much for all those thoughts and comments and suggestions for us. I did put back up here so you all could see the URL for the white paper itself. We will send it to you, as I mentioned in the email that you'll get from us, and you'll get a second communication from us with a URL to the example, the research example that we talked about. We happen to choose women and immigration and combine those two things together, and we'll go through the thought process of how the researchers did what they did. and then hopefully you can use that as a tool, like I said, as you're doing some instructional learning at your own institution and supporting what you've got in the library and encouraging your students to come into the library to use all that great stuff. So if there are no other questions, on behalf of Mark Ailing and myself, I'd like to thank you for your time today. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you thought it was useful, and that you also download the white paper and take a look at that as well. And then Mark Dirks, did you want to make any closing comments?
Sure. And first off, I would just like to say thank you, Barbara and Mark, for spending your time with us today and for presenting this really interesting information. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remind everyone that we did record today's program, and you should see within about 24 hours an email from ACRL in Choice with a direct link to the recording. You should also see in that a link to our brief 5-question survey. And if you have a moment now here at the end of the webinar, I'm going to be dropping that right into the chat box for everyone. So please do take a moment to fill out the survey and let us know how we did today. We would appreciate your feedback. And I would just say thanks to everyone out there listening in. Thank you for joining us. I hope, as Barb said, that you enjoyed the session and that all of you have a great day today. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.